I returned to the family dairy farm after my father passed away a few months ago. At 32, I thought I could handle it. I knew the land, but I hadn't been there in years. I figured I could get it back in shape. But strange things started happening, and I couldn't make sense of them. One evening, I went to the barn to collect eggs. It felt like a simple chore. As I worked, I noticed something unusual. There were old photos pinned to a corkboard. They were faded and dusty, and the faces were unfamiliar. I stepped closer. The images showed events that felt wrong, like they didn't belong to us. I felt chills run down my spine. I should have walked away, but I couldn't. I just stared at those photos, feeling lost. A few days later, I tried to start the tractor. It was an easy task. I turned the key, but nothing happened. I wiggled the wires and checked the battery. The engine should have turned over, but it didn't. I felt uneasy about it. The old machinery shouldn't be that stubborn. I shook my head, thinking I was just overreacting, but still, I felt a tingle at my fingertips. The next time I stepped into the barn, the cold air hit me. Outside it was warm, but in there it felt like winter. I paused, scanning the room. A strange sensation wrapped around me, and my heart raced. I thought I heard something, a soft whisper. I shook my head. Maybe I was imagining it, but it felt real. Then I met my neighbor, Ruth. She seemed friendly at first. As we talked, she brought up a man who had disappeared years ago down the road. Her eyes widened with worry as she said, "They never found him, you know." Those words hit me hard. I thought about the old photos again. What was the connection? The knot in my stomach tightened. One evening, I went back to the barn as the sun set. I felt uneasy as I walked through the door. It was dark inside. I flipped the light switch, and the bulb flickered. Something felt wrong. I looked around, and once again, I felt that watched sensation. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. I wanted to leave, but it felt like I was stuck. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging me into pitch darkness. My breath quickened. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I felt like the shadows were closing in on me. And then I heard it again, the whisper. My name echoed in the silence. Panic surged through me. I rushed to the door, but froze. Why did it feel like I wasn't alone? "Why did you come back?" the whisper asked. I didn't know what to say. The shadows felt alive, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I stood there, paralyzed by fear. I could never have imagined that coming back would lead to this. Unease never left me, and I knew I had to find answers, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to. I stood in that dark barn, heart racing, as the whisper faded into silence. It took a moment for my mind to catch up with my instincts. I stumbled backward toward the door, desperate to escape the grasp of the shadows. The chill in the air clawed at my skin. All I wanted was to bolt outside and breathe in the night. As I finally pushed through the door, the warm air met me like a comforting hug. I leaned against the barn, trying to calm down. I needed to distract myself, to feel grounded. The sound of crickets chirping broke the silence. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the panic that still gripped me. Then I remembered Ruth and the conversation we had. Maybe she could help me make sense of all this. The walk to her house felt longer than usual. My legs ached, but it wasn't just from fatigue. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something behind me. The darkness felt thicker. I knocked on her door, and she answered quickly. Her smile faded when she saw my face. "What happened?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure how to explain. I told her about the whisper, the sensation of being watched, and the dark shadows in the barn. Each word felt heavy, but I needed to share my fear. Her brow furrowed deeper with every detail. "What you're feeling, it's not just in your head," she said quietly. "Some things happened on this land long before you returned, things that need to be uncovered." She led me inside, and we sat at her kitchen table. The familiar smell of baked goods filled the air. It should have been comforting, but it only reminded me of home and what I was running from. Ruth reached for an old, worn-out book on her shelf. This was my grandmother's journal. She wrote about strange occurrences in the area, she said, flipping through the pages. I leaned closer, eager to see what secrets it might reveal. Names of people from the past filled the pages, but one entry made my stomach drop. It talked about a man who had gone missing near the farm 3 decades ago, one who matched the description of the man Ruth mentioned earlier. He was never found, Ruth said softly. Some say he might still be here, trapped in the land. What do you mean by trapped? I asked, dread pooling in the pit of my stomach. Some believe his spirit didn't move on. It might be tied to the barn. That's why the shadows feel heavy. My mind raced as I thought about the photos, the weird occurrences, and now this discovery. If he was still here, what did it mean for me? I needed answers. Just then, a loud noise echoed from outside. It sounded like something or someone was in the barn.
The sound jolted me upright. My heart pounded in my chest as I exchanged worried glances with Ruth. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We should check it out." As we stepped outside, the shadows stretched long across the yard. I felt the weight of history pressing down on me, compelling me to face what lay ahead. I took a hesitant step toward the barn, and Ruth followed close behind. And then I heard it again, the whisper. It was calling me back. "Wait," I said, gripping Ruth's arm. "I don't want to go back in there." But I also felt an undeniable pull. What secrets were locked inside that barn? As we approached the door, anxiety seeped into my bones. That's when I saw it moving in the darkness. Something was waiting for us inside. I froze. The outline of a figure was shifting toward the barn door, just beyond the dim light spilling out from inside. My breath hitched, and the whisper echoed in my ears, pulling me deeper into a well of dread. "Did you see that?" I barely managed to whisper to Ruth, who was clutching my arm tightly. "I don't know," she replied, her voice low. "Maybe it's just an animal." "An animal doesn't whisper." I thought about turning and sprinting down the driveway, but my feet felt glued to the ground. The figure moved again, its form shifting and flickering as if it didn't quite want to be seen. I took a step forward, drawn in by a mix of terror and curiosity. Ruth followed, her eyes wide and pleading. "Maybe we should call for help," she proposed, her voice quivering with uncertainty. "Who would we call? It's just us here." The truth sank in. Whatever was in the barn didn't belong there. My skin prickled with every step as we approached. Each creak of the wood beneath our feet sent a pang of fear through me. We reached the door. My hand hovered above the handle. "On 3?" I suggested half-heartedly. Ruth nodded, panic etched on her face. 1, 2, 3. We pushed the door open, and the shadows seemed to engulf us as we stepped inside. The musty scent of hay and damp wood hit me. The dim light cast eerie shapes against the walls. I squinted, trying to make out the lurking figure. "Whatever you are, just show yourself," I called out, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound brave. The figure recoiled further into the shadows, and the whisper grew louder, urging me to come closer. I took one cautious step and then another, feeling each heartbeat pound through my veins. Ruth followed, but stayed a few paces behind, her uncertainty palpable. "Maybe it's just a trick of the light," I said, trying to convince myself. But I knew deep down that wasn't true. The low whisper was becoming a chant, weaving around me like a web. Suddenly, I spotted something shiny on the ground near where the figure had been. I bent down, and to my surprise, my fingers brushed against the cold metal of a locket. The intricate design was familiar, the same symbol from the photos hanging in my house. I felt my heart race even faster. "Ruth," I called softly, holding the locket up for her to see. "Look at this." As she stepped closer, the temperature in the barn dropped, and the whisper became a series of frantic voices. It felt like being pulled into a storm. I looked around, feeling more lost than ever. In that moment, I realized this locket was more than just a trinket. It held a connection to whatever had been whispering, to the man who had vanished years ago. I needed answers. What was the significance of the locket? Before I could ask, the shadows twitched and I caught movement again. This time, a figure stepped partially into the light. A gaunt man with hollow eyes and a face twisted in anguish. He raised a hand toward us, mouthing words I couldn't hear but felt vibrating in the air. Then, everything went dark. The barn door slammed shut behind us, trapping us in total darkness. The darkness felt alive, wrapping around us like a thick blanket. I could hear Ruth's shallow breaths beside me, matching my rising panic. I fumbled for the locket in my pocket, desperate for some kind of light or reassurance. "Ruth, can you see anything?" I whispered, my heart racing. "No, it's just dark," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. We need to find a way out. I stepped cautiously forward, feeling the cold wooden walls. Each movement felt like I was wading through molasses, the heavy air almost pressing against my body as if urging me to stay put. Suddenly, I heard a soft scuffle beneath my feet. I froze and turned my flashlight on, the beam cutting through the blackness. In the narrow light, I saw the ghostly figure again. But now it looked different. He was closer, and I could see the despair on his face more clearly. It felt as though he was begging for something. "Please, help me," he seemed to whisper, but the words came out as a low echo, filling my ears with tension. I stared, my stomach churning. Why did he look so familiar? Who are you?" I stammered, trying to hold on to my courage. He pointed a long, bony finger to the far corner of the barn. Just beyond the shadows, where the light couldn't reach, there was an old wooden crate stacked high with dust. I had the strangest feeling that whatever he wanted was in that crate. "Are you trying to tell us something?" Ruth asked, her voice shakier than before. The figure only nodded, and in that moment the barn floor creaked ominously beneath me. I felt the ground shift, like it was pulling back from under my feet. My heart dropped. "We need to go over there. I think he wants us to look," I urged, glancing at Ruth. "Do we have to?" she asked, eyes wide. "It could be dangerous." "I don't think we have a choice." The locket felt heavy in my pocket, a weight pulling me toward that corner. The man's empathetic gaze pushed me onward, despite the fear gnawing at my insides. I stepped over a pile of hay and edged closer to the crate. The air felt charged, vibrating with unseen energy. Just as I reached out for the crate's lid, I heard a loud thud behind me. Ruth screamed. The barn door was shaking violently, as if something was trying to break in. "Go!" I yelled, adrenaline surging. I flung the crate open. Inside, there was a stack of old journals, their pages yellowed and frayed. I grabbed one, hoping it would hold some answers. But before I could open it, the door burst open. Light flooded in, momentarily blinding me. I barely registered another figure stepping inside, a silhouette etched against the bright backdrop. The man's expression twisted in what appeared to be fury, and I could hear raspy, ragged breaths filling the air. "Get away from her!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the barn walls. I turned to Ruth, the fear in her eyes matching the chaos unfolding around us. Suddenly, the ghostly man vanished into the shadows just as the barn's overwhelming darkness returned. I felt the weight of the journal in my hands, its secrets beckoning to be uncovered. But I also felt the encroaching danger lurking at the edges of our perception. That's when I saw it. My name scrawled across the top of the journal in shaky handwriting. I needed to understand why that was there and what it meant for us. My hands trembled as I held the journal. My name was written there, clear and undeniable, yet I felt no sense of ownership over it. It made no sense. Who had written it, and how did it find its way into this dusty barn? "Look at this," I said, trying to keep the panic from creeping into my voice. I turned the journal toward Ruth, who stood frozen by the door. "It's mine. We need to see what's inside." Before she could respond, the man in the doorway moved forward, his shadow swallowing the light in an instant. My heart raced again as I took a step back. "Stay back!" I shouted, clutching the journal like a shield. The figure hesitated, eyes narrowing, but the anger in his face was palpable. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and shaky. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "What do you mean?" Ruth interjected, finding her courage. "We came here to find out what happened." "Leave the journal alone," he warned, gesturing toward it with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "You have no
idea what it holds. Maybe I want to find out," I snapped back, a strange defiance rising within me. The man's face contorted as if in pain. "You can't. It will call to you. It wants you to uncover the truth, but you'll regret it." "What truth?" I pressed, desperate for an answer. The shadows around him flickered, and for a moment I saw flashes of another time, a hidden memory lurking just beneath the surface. "Enough!" he shouted suddenly, the sound reverberating off the walls. He lunged forward, and I instinctively stumbled back, nearly falling into the crate. In that moment of chaos, Ruth grabbed my arm, pulling me further away. "We need to go, now," she urged, her voice urgent. We turned, but the man blocked our path, otherworldly rage etched on his face. I felt ice settle in my stomach. The gentle pressure of the journal seemed to hum beneath my fingers, as if it was alive. "You can't run from this!" he screamed, his hands reaching out toward us, a wild desperation in his eyes. My instincts kicked in. I stepped to the side, still gripping the journal tightly, and made for the other end of the barn. "Follow me!" I yelled to Ruth, who didn't hesitate. As we darted past, I felt a sudden chill wash over me, like a cold wind had swept through the barn. In that fleeting moment, I dared to glance back. The man's expression had shifted. It was no longer anger, but something deeper, a profound sadness. I could hear him calling, his voice distorted by the distance. "You'll regret it! Don't!" But I blocked it out, focused on getting to the door, my breath coming in short gasps. Outside, the moon hung high, illuminating the area with an eerie calm. We stumbled into the open air, the light a stark contrast to the darkness we had just escaped. "What just happened?" Ruth asked, panting beside me, her eyes wide with disbelief. I don't know," I admitted, holding the journal tightly against my chest. The darkness of the barn was behind us, but I could feel lingering eyes upon us. "But I think whatever is in this journal relates to him." Ruth hesitated, glancing back at the barn. "Are we safe now?" I wanted to say yes, but something told me this was far from over. As I looked down at the journal, I felt its weight shift slightly in my grip, and a faint whisper echoed in my mind. Suddenly, I made the connection. The journals are about our family. My voice trembled with realization. He's not just a stranger. He's connected to us. Ruth's expression shifted from worry to a determined resolve. "Then we have to find out the truth once and for all." Just as I nodded in agreement, I heard a noise from the barn, a soft thud, followed by a shuffling sound. My heart dropped. We might not be alone. Panic surged again. What if he followed us? I tightened my grip on the journal, but before I could respond, a shadow slithered out from the barn's doorway. I didn't know what was coming next, but deep down, I felt the inexplicable truth. I had stirred something much bigger than either of us could ever understand, and we were right in its path. The shadow oozed from the barn and took form in the moonlight. It was a smaller figure, its outline wavering slightly, as if it were made of mist rather than flesh. My heart raced in sync with the panic rolling through my mind. "Ruth, we have to go," I whispered urgently, my eyes locked on the apparition. "Wait," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. almost like she was entranced. "Do you think it's him?" I wasn't sure what to believe. The journal was supposed to hold answers, but it felt like we were still shrouded in more questions. The figure took a step closer, and I could make out its features. A woman, perhaps in her 40s. Her face was ethereal, a mix of familiarity and confusion. I felt as if I knew her but couldn't place why. "Do you see that?" Ruth said, her voice trembling. "She looks like our mother." It struck me like a punch. The resemblance was uncanny. "No, it can't be," I said, shaking my head. "This is impossible." But the closer the figure moved, the clearer her eyes became, filled with an intensity of longing and despair. A knot twisted in my stomach. "Mom, is that you?" She froze mid-step, and the world around us seemed to stutter. The shadows shifted, and I felt the air thicken as she extended her hand toward us. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice both familiar and distant, echoing like a distant memory. "It's not safe." "Why?" I shouted back, desperation bubbling in my chest. Her face twisted in pain. "The journal, it's a gateway. You have to leave it behind. You won't be able to escape its grasp." My heart sank. "What do you mean? What's going to happen?" I turned to Ruth, who was now stepping closer, drawn by the motherly aura that radiated from the figure. "Ruth, don't!" I reached for her, but she shook her head, lost in her own thoughts. "Mom," Ruth said softly, tears welling in her eyes. "After all these years?" The figure's expression morphed into desperation. "Please, you must listen. There are things trapped in that journal, darkness you don't understand. You have to back away now, or it will consume you both." I clutched the journal tightly, feeling its weight shift and pulse as if it were alive. Could it really hold that much power? "We can't let it get to us," I told myself, starting to feel the pull of its mystery. A sudden gust of wind howled through the night, snatching me from the moment. The figure stumbled back, and with a mournful howl, she began to dissolve into the air. "No!" I shouted instinctively, lunging forward, but feeling only cold emptiness in my hands. "Where did she go?" Ruth asked, glancing around, fear creeping into her voice again. "I don't know," I exclaimed, shaking my head, "but I think we need to leave, now." We turned to sprint away from the barn, but a blinding flash of light erupted behind us, momentarily illuminating the dark field. I felt a sudden heat wash over me, and I dared to glance back. What I saw made my breath hitch. The barn was glowing, the journal floating above the ground, surrounded by tendrils of light. A low hum vibrated through the air. "It's awakening!" We hadn't stirred just any old secret. We had stirred something much worse. Without thinking, I grabbed Ruth's arm and urged her to run faster. "This isn't over," I murmured fearfully. "We're just getting started." As we sprinted toward the safety of the trees, I knew deep down that whatever was happening, whatever connection lingered in that barn, wasn't going to let us go that easily. The trees loomed ahead, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I could feel the pulse of the journal in my backpack, an almost living presence urging me to turn around. "Don't look back," I whispered to myself. Ruth was still at my side, but I could see the shadows of doubt creeping into her eyes. "Do you really think that was her?" she panted, her breaths coming in sharp bursts. "Is it possible?" My stomach twisted. I don't know. Maybe we should have listened." I hadn't meant to say it, but the truth hung heavy between us. I didn't want to believe it was her, but that resemblance was hard to ignore. We reached the edge of the tree line, and as we ducked into the deeper shadows, the sounds of the night pressed down on us. The chirping of crickets faded into silence, leaving only the pulse of the journal resonating in my mind. It felt as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "Do you think it's safe here?" Ruth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied honestly, "but we need to figure out what's going on." I pulled the journal from my bag, feeling its weight anchor me as much as it frightened me. Ruth stared at it, doubt swirling in her eyes. What if it's something evil? What if it wants to take us, just like it took her? I don't want to think about that, I said. I opened the journal, the pages crisp and filled with a dark energy. We scanned the cramped handwriting. It detailed rituals and names I didn't recognize, almost as if it were warning us. But of what? Then I noticed a passage that made my heart drop. The journal is a conduit. It bridges our world with a far deeper darkness. Panic threatened to take hold, but I forced myself to focus. "Look here," I said, pointing at an illustration of an ominous symbol. "What do you think this means?" Ruth squinted at the drawing. "It looks like a—" Her words faltered. "What?" I urged. "It's a sigil. I've seen it before, in old stories." Her voice broke off into silence. "Ruth, what stories?" Her eyes widened. "In that book we found at Grandma's, don't you remember? It talked about things that lurk in the shadows, waiting to come through." As if summoned by her words, the temperature dropped drastically. I glanced around, the darkness around us suddenly feeling oppressive. The shadows seemed to twist and shift, blurring the line between the trees and the void. "Something is wrong," I stammered. A twig snapped behind us. "Run," Ruth whispered in horror, her voice shaking. We bolted deeper into the woods, branches clawing at our clothes. And then I heard it, a low, rumbling growl, rumbling through the trees. It was close, too close, a sound that promised dread and pain. I had to keep Ruth safe. "What do we do?" I gasped. "Get to the river," she said, her resolve hardening in her voice. "If we can reach that, we might find high ground." But as we raced forward, my heart hammered in my chest. I could feel the presence chasing us, growing bolder. Just as we reached the riverbank, something flickered in the corner of my eye. That's when I saw it, a figure watching us from the shadows. It stood still, a dark silhouette with haunting eyes that reflected desperate longing. "Ruth, back!" I shouted. But as I turned to pull her away, the entity stepped forward, and everything went dark. I stumbled and fell into cold water, the river pulling me under. I gasped, but couldn't catch my breath. The water enveloped me, dark and swirling, and for a moment I felt weightless. Panic gripped me, and I flailed, trying to find the surface. A hand grabbed my arm, pulling me up. Ruth's face broke through the darkness, her eyes wide with terror. "We've got to get out," she shouted, her voice urgent. I coughed up water as I clawed my way to the bank. The pull of the river weakened as I scrambled onto the muddy shore. Ruth was right beside me, soaked but alive. We collapsed against the bank, gasping for air. "What was that?" I managed to choke out. I don't know," she breathed, her gaze flickering to the woods. "But it's coming. We can't stay here." We glanced at the river, then at the darkness beyond the trees. That chill of fear resumed, crawling up our spines. I finally remembered the journal, pulling it from my backpack. The waterlogged pages were stained and damp, but I could still make out some text. "Look," I said, flipping through until I found the passage again. "This sigil, it might be a way to protect ourselves." "Didn't you say it was a conduit?" Ruth asked, fear lining her. "It might also be a shield," I replied, the thought somehow calming me. "We need to figure out how to use it." Just then the growl returned, echoing louder this time, punctuated by the sound of something heavy moving through the underbrush. Ruth's focus shifted back to the shadows, and her breath quickened. "Let's go further from the water," I said, scanning for a path. "We have to get some distance." We pushed ourselves to our feet, still trembling. The figure from before flashed through my mind, its eyes burning in the dark. I looked over at Ruth, who nodded, urgency propelling us forward. As we moved, the growl morphed into a series of cruel cackles, chillingly close. "Whatever that was," I whispered, "it chased us for a reason." "It wants the journal," Ruth said, realization dawning in her eyes. "It must know what it can do,
or wants to use it itself. We can't let it take it from us. We turned back toward the trees, but the shadows seemed to close in around us. Every rustle in the underbrush made my heart race, and a sense of deepening dread took hold. Suddenly, a sharp light flickered in the distance. It looked like an old lantern, its warm light casting long shadows. I squinted at the silhouette standing beneath it. "Can you see that?" Ruth nodded, uncertainty etched on her face. "Do you think someone else is here?" "Maybe, or maybe it's another trap," I replied, hesitating. "We need to know." Steeling ourselves, we crept forward, our footsteps soft against the dirt. The lantern's light grew brighter, illuminating a clearing with weathered stones arranged in a dark, foreboding circle. I felt the journal pulse against my side, vibrating like a warning. "Maybe we shouldn't," Ruth started, but before she could finish, the growling escalated into a blood-curdling howl that shook the ground beneath us. Instinct kicked in, and just as I turned to run, the ground beneath my feet gave way. I stumbled, grabbing for something, anything to hold on to. Then everything spiraled into chaos. I landed hard, halfway tumbling down what felt like a steep ravine. Mud and dirt filled my mouth as I gasped for air. The world flipped upside down, pounding in my ears, and I couldn't tell if I was still falling or it had finally stopped. "Ruth!" I yelled, panic flooding my voice. "Are you okay?" "Hang on!" she called, her voice echoing faintly from above. I pushed myself up, fighting against the disorientation, and spotted her silhouetted at the edge. A flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned just in time to see a shadow dart behind a tree. My heart raced. "We need to move," I shouted, scrambling to my feet. The moment I stood, that horrible growl returned, louder now, reverberating around the narrow space. "This way!" Ruth waved urgently, her eyes wide with fear. We stumbled through the underbrush, jumping over roots and ducking under branches. The forest seemed
alive, thrumming with menace. The air turned thick and humid. It was hard to breathe. "Where are we even going?" I gasped, trying to make sense of our surroundings. "Anywhere but here," Ruth replied, desperation clinging to her voice as we rushed deeper into the woods. I could hear it stalking us, could sense it closing in. We plunged into a clearing, and Ruth skidded to a halt. "Look!" She pointed at something lying on the ground, half hidden by leaves. I stepped closer. It was another journal. This one was in better shape than mine, leather-bound and untouched by water. "What if it's connected to what we found?" I murmured. "Or it could be a trap," Ruth warned. I hesitated, but curiosity ate away at my fear. I bent down and picked it up, flipping through the pages. The writing was familiar. Unfamiliar symbols scattered across the pages, resembling the ones from my own journal. My pulse quickened as I recognized the sigil I had seen before, interlaced with new sketches. They looked like animals, twisted and sinister. "What does it say?" Ruth asked, peering over my shoulder. I scanned the text. A feeling of dread washed over me as I read. To wield the sigil's true power, it must be drawn during the blood moon. The words faded into gibberish as the growl returned, now so close it felt like it was breathing down our necks. "Blood moon?" I muttered, anxiety knotting my stomach. "That's tonight. What does it mean?" Before I could finish, the ground shook beneath us and a low rumble echoed. The trees creaked and moaned, branches snapping above, as if something massive was moving through them. "Run!" Ruth screamed, pulling my arm. We bolted in the opposite direction, adrenaline surging. I clutched the journal, desperate to keep it safe, but I could feel the weight of the shadows chasing us. That's when I saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness, its eyes gleaming with a predatory glint, a twisted smile stretching across its face.
"Over here!" Ruth yanked me into the cover of the trees. But as we dove into the thicket, I realized we were getting separated. I glanced back, hearing Ruth's panicked breath behind me, and my heart dropped. Was it too late to find safety? I pushed through the underbrush, branches clawing at my skin, drowning out the fear wrapping around my chest. Ruth's shouting faded. The woods morphed into a maze, every twisted path leading me deeper into uncertainty. My breath came in short gasps, the forest alive with an energy that thrummed underfoot. Suddenly, I heard it, the growl, close. I risked a glance over my shoulder, but saw only shadows. Panic prickled at the back of my mind, urging me to keep moving. I darted forward, desperate to find a way out. Then, ahead of me, there was a flicker of light. I slowed, heart pounding, a sliver of hope threading through the dread. As I approached, I realized
It was a clearing. The silvery glow of the moon washed over a large stone altar. Moss draped over its edges, as if nature sought to reclaim it. Something about the altar felt significant, almost magnetic. I stepped closer, the journal's weight still heavy in my hands. The markings from both journals seemed to dance in my mind. Beneath the light of the blood moon, I suddenly understood their purpose. They were not just drawings, but sigils of protection. Could this be the place to reverse whatever had been unleashed? Before I could think further, movement caught my eye. A shadow loomed at the edge of the clearing. My heart sank as a jagged figure emerged, a wretched form cloaked in darkness. It was the cursed man from the barn. His hollow eyes locked onto me, filled with an anguish that twisted my gut. "Leave it," he rasped, pointing a skeletal finger at the journal. "You don't know what you'll unleash." Desperation washed over me as I clutched the journal to my chest. "I need to understand. What do you mean?" But he only shook his head, sorrow etched deep on his ghostly face, as if he bore the weight of 1,000 regrets. Only anguish lies within. Darkness consumes the unprepared. Leave now, before the blood moon rises too high. I glanced up, panic surging as I realized the moon had crested, bathing the clearing in ethereal light. The shadows around the altar began to pulse, drawing closer, whispering promises of power and untold knowledge. "No, stay back," I shouted, instinctively stepping toward the altar. I had to know more. I had to break the curse gripping my family. The ghostly figure of the man wailed, and shadows writhed around him, thickening, darkening. I felt their pull, urging me to step back and flee. But my feet were glued, my mind racing. "Ruth," I hollered, praying she was somewhere close. I heard a rustle behind me. She emerged, wild and breathless. Relief washed over me, but it quickly faded as the shadows recoiled from her approach, their energy shifting into a palpable tension. "Are they—" Ruth began, eyes wide, but a sudden gust of wind tore through the clearing, throwing her off balance. "Don't let them touch you," I yelled, struggling to focus against the mounting chaos. My heart raced. I had to act. With newfound urgency, I opened the journal and let the weight of its pages weave through my fingers. I needed to draw the sigils, the very symbols that were supposed to protect me. I could see the drawing in my mind, almost feeling the energy flowing from the pages. "Help me, Ruth," I shouted, urgency coursing through me. "We need to draw the sigil together." Ruth nodded, and together we tore at a piece of fabric from our clothes. I could feel the shadows congealing into a tangible force, thick and overwhelming. We worked in tandem, tracing the sigil on the ground, while the air around us crackled violently, like electricity. Every stroke felt like a lifeline tethering us to sanity. The growls grew louder, a cacophony of fury circling us. "Almost there," Ruth urged, and I could see the sigils starting to glow faintly beneath our fingers.
The shadows lurched forward, hungry. "Now!" we shouted together, falling back as the sigil ignited into a brilliant light, casting the darkness back. The shadowy figures recoiled, retreating into the trees. The wretched man screamed in fury, caught in the radiance. "You can't escape! You don't know what you're doing!" His voice echoed in the clearing, but as the light flared, his form waned, consumed by the brilliance. Ruth and I huddled close, light cutting the shadows from our world. But even as daylight chased away darkness, I felt uncertainty linger in the edge of my thoughts. Slowly, the light dimmed. The man's figure had dissolved into nothing, leaving an uncomfortable silence. "Did it work?" Ruth breathed, her expression a mix of fear and hope. I glanced down at the sigil on the ground. It flickered, pulsing faintly, a whisper of danger lingering in its core. "I don't know." A chill sparked at the back of my neck. Was this really over? Though the threat had faded, uncertainty hung in the air. If it's tied to us, will it come back? "I can't say," Ruth said, glancing at the journal still clutched in my hand. "But we need to leave, and we can't let it draw us in again." With one last look at the clearing, I nodded. We backed away, the sensation of the barn's darkness lingering like a ghost in the back of my mind. As we moved deeper into the woods, silence pressed close around us. "What if the journal has more answers?" Ruth asked. "I don't know," I sighed, casting a worried glance behind me. "But I'm not sure we're ready to unlock any more secrets. Whatever haunted that barn and the farm would remain bound within those pages for now, at least until the next blood moon rose."